Imagine paying a complete stranger just to wake you up for work every morning. That might sound ridiculous today, especially when almost everyone carries an alarm clock in their pocket. But for more than 100 years, millions of people had no better option. Long before smartphones, digital clocks, or even reliable alarm clocks at home, entire towns depended on people whose full-time job was knocking on windows before sunrise. Factory workers, miners, railroad employees, and dock workers trusted these strangers with something incredibly important. If they overslept, they could lose a day's pay, lose their job, or struggle to feed their families. And the strangest part is that this wasn't some small local tradition. It was a real profession that existed across industrial cities and employed thousands of people. So how did waking people up become a job? Who paid for it? And what invention made this entire profession disappear almost overnight? The answer is much stranger than most people realize. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe if you enjoy fascinating stories from history. We explore the surprising origins of everyday objects, forgotten events, and the strange facts that shaped the world we live in today. Today, almost nobody thinks about how they wake up in the morning. Most people simply set an alarm on their phone, place it beside the bed, and trust that it will ring at the right time. It feels so normal that it is hard to imagine doing anything else. If someone told you they pay another person to wake them up every morning, you would probably think it was a joke. It sounds like the kind of thing that belongs in a comedy movie, not in real life. But for a very long time, paying someone to wake you up was completely normal. In fact, there was a period when entire cities depended on it. Millions of workers trusted strangers to make sure they got out of bed on time. What makes this story even stranger is that alarm clocks already existed. Many people assume these professional wake-up workers existed before alarm clocks were invented. That would make sense. But that is not what happened. The truth is much more surprising. Human wake-up workers and alarm clocks existed at the same time, and for many years people chose the human being instead of the machine. At first that sounds ridiculous. Why would anyone pay another person every week when they could simply buy a clock? The answer tells us a lot about how different everyday life used to be. When people picture the past, they often imagine a slower world where exact schedules did not matter very much. They imagine farmers working when the sun came up and going home when the sun went down. While that was true for many people, it was not true for everyone. By the 19th century, huge industrial cities were growing across Britain and other parts of Europe. Factories were becoming larger every year. Railroads connected cities that had once been far apart. Mines employed thousands of workers. Docks loaded ships day and night. Suddenly, being 10 minutes late could create serious problems. A worker who missed the beginning of a shift could lose money. In some cases, they could lose their job completely. Factory owners cared about time more than ever before. Railroad companies cared about time more than ever before. Businesses that depended on large groups of workers arriving together cared about time more than ever before. Yet there was one major problem. Most ordinary people did not have a reliable way to wake themselves up. Today we take accurate time for granted. Every phone shows the same time. Every computer updates automatically. Every digital clock stays accurate for months. The world these workers lived in was very different. Personal clocks could be expensive. Cheap clocks often failed. Some ran fast. Others ran slow. Some simply stopped working during the night. Even people who owned alarm clocks could not always trust them. Imagine knowing that being late might cost you a day's wages, while your alarm clock had a reputation for failing without warning. Suddenly, paying a reliable person starts sounding much more reasonable. Many people today think professional wake-up workers must have served wealthy customers. The reality was almost the opposite. Their customers were often factory workers, miners, dock workers, newspaper printers, and railway employees. These were people who depended on strict schedules and could not afford mistakes. In many towns, waking people up became a real business. Customers paid a small fee, and every morning someone would come to their home and make sure they got out of bed. Some people find that difficult to believe because it sounds too organized. Yet newspapers from the time described these workers as a normal part of daily life. Local residents knew who they were. Workers knew where to find them. Some became famous in their neighborhoods because everyone depended on them. Here is where the story becomes even stranger. Many professional wake-up workers did not simply knock on a front door and leave. They developed methods that sound almost unbelievable today. Some tapped bedroom windows using long poles. Others used tools that allowed them to reach upper floors without entering a building. Some customers demanded proof that they were awake before the wake-up worker moved on to the next house. If the customer rolled over and went back to sleep, the worker's reputation could suffer. Think about that for a moment. Entire communities trusted certain individuals to do something that smartphones now do automatically every day. These people became a hidden part of the economy. They were not inventors. They were not factory owners. They were not politicians. Yet thousands of workers depended on them every single week. And the biggest surprise is that most people today have never heard of them. Their profession was once common, useful, and respected. Then it disappeared so completely that it almost feels fictional. The question is not whether these professional wake-up workers existed. The evidence shows they absolutely did. The real question is why so many people needed them in the first place. To understand that, we need to look at the moment when the world became obsessed with the clock, and when arriving a few minutes late suddenly became a serious problem. To understand why people paid strangers to wake them up, we first need to understand what happened when the world became obsessed with time. For most of human history, exact minutes did not matter very much. People still worked hard, but many jobs followed natural routines instead of strict schedules. A farmer did not usually lose money because breakfast started 7 minutes late. A fisherman was not fired because he arrived 12 minutes behind schedule. Life could be demanding, but it was often less controlled by the clock. Then the Industrial Revolution began changing everything. During the late 18th century and throughout the 19th century, factories started appearing across Britain and later across much of Europe and North America. These factories were very different from traditional workplaces. Hundreds of workers often shared the same building. Large machines operated together. Production depended on everyone arriving at roughly the same time. If one worker arrived late, it could slow down an entire process. Factory owners quickly learned that strict schedules increased production. The more organized the workforce became, the more goods could be produced. As factories expanded, a new problem appeared. People suddenly needed to wake up at very specific times every day. A worker might need to arrive before sunrise. Another might begin a shift at 5 in the morning. Others worked through the night and slept during daylight hours. Missing a shift was no longer a minor inconvenience. It could mean losing valuable income. In some factories, workers were fined for arriving late. In others, repeated lateness could lead to dismissal. This created enormous pressure on ordinary families. A reliable wake-up method became almost as important as having a job itself. At the same time, cities were growing at an incredible speed. Places such as Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool, Glasgow, and Sheffield were attracting huge numbers of workers. Thousands of people moved from rural areas into industrial neighborhoods. Entire communities became connected to factory schedules. Bakers needed to start before most customers woke up. Dock workers loaded cargo according to shipping schedules. Railway employees operated on carefully planned timetables. Newspaper printers worked through the night to prepare morning editions. Every year, more jobs became connected to exact hours and exact minutes. Yet technology had not fully caught up with these new demands. Many people today imagine that clocks were everywhere during this period. The reality was more complicated. Public clocks existed, church clocks existed, wealthy families often owned reliable clocks. But many working-class households did not own high-quality timepieces. Even when they did, those clocks were not always dependable. Mechanical clocks could lose time. Springs could wear out. Parts could fail unexpectedly. Some alarm clocks worked perfectly for months and then failed on the most important morning of the year. Imagine depending on a machine that might or might not ring when needed. That uncertainty worried many workers. The stakes were simply too high. One missed shift could affect a family's budget for an entire week. This problem became even more serious when railroads entered the picture. Before railroads, different towns often used slightly different local times. That was not a major issue when travel was slow. Trains changed everything. Rail companies needed schedules that matched across long distances. A train could not operate efficiently if every town followed a different clock. As rail networks expanded, standardized time became increasingly important. Suddenly, millions of people were expected to organize their lives around the same schedules. This sounds ordinary today, but at the time, it represented a major change. People were learning to live by the clock in ways previous generations never had. One of the most interesting examples came from factory towns, where entire neighborhoods followed the same routine. Hundreds of workers might need to begin work within a short period. If many overslept, production could suffer. Employers wanted reliability. Workers wanted reliability. Families wanted reliability. Everyone needed a solution. Some people relied on family members. Others asked neighbors for help. Certain households developed complicated systems involving multiple clocks, but these methods were not always successful. Family members overslept. Neighbors forgot. Clocks failed. Human error appeared everywhere. The demand for dependable wake-up calls kept growing. This created an opportunity that few people could have predicted. If workers needed help waking up, someone could provide that service professionally. Instead of relying on relatives or unreliable machines, people could pay a small fee to someone whose entire job focused on getting customers out of bed. It sounds unusual today, but from the perspective of a 19th century worker, it made perfect sense. Paying a few coins each week was often cheaper than risking lost wages. Reliability mattered more than convenience. Trust mattered more than technology. The strange profession that eventually emerged was not created because people were lazy. It appeared because industrial society created a problem that existing technology could not fully solve. Cities needed workers on time. Businesses needed workers on time. Railroads needed workers on time. Families needed workers on time. And until better alarm clocks became affordable and dependable, thousands of people found themselves facing the same question every night. Who could they trust to make sure tomorrow's workday actually began on time? At this point, you might be wondering who actually did this job. Who woke up before everyone else just to wake other people up? The answer is surprisingly simple. They were ordinary men and women who found a way to make money from one of the most important problems of industrial life. In Britain, they became known as knocker-uppers. The name sounds strange today, but during the 19th and early 20th centuries, many people knew exactly what it meant. If you lived in the right neighborhood, you probably knew the local knocker-upper by name. You trusted them, you paid them, and in some cases your job depended on them. One of the most famous examples was a woman named Mary Smith from London. Instead of carrying a long stick, she used a pea shooter. She would stand outside customers' homes and fire dried peas at their windows. It sounds almost ridiculous to modern ears, yet it worked surprisingly well. The small peas created enough noise to wake sleeping customers without disturbing entire streets. More importantly, it allowed her to reach windows that would have been difficult to tap by hand. The fact that people paid for this service tells you how valuable reliable wake-up calls had become. Other knocker-uppers preferred different tools. Many carried long bamboo poles. Some poles were several meters long and allowed workers to reach second-floor windows. They would gently tap the glass until the customer responded. This was not a quick knock followed by immediate departure. A good knocker-upper often waited until they were sure the customer was awake. Some clients were known for turning over and falling back asleep. Those customers required extra attention. Reliability was everything in this business. A single mistake could damage a worker's reputation. Imagine paying someone every week to wake you up, only to oversleep because they rushed away too early. Most customers would quickly find someone else. What makes this profession even more interesting is that it operated almost entirely on trust. There were no contracts. There were no mobile phones. There were no digital reminders. A customer simply expected that someone would appear outside their home at the agreed time. Every morning, week after week, year after year, the knocker-upper followed a route that often included dozens of houses. Some worked with factory employees. Others focused on miners, dock workers, or railway staff. Many customers worked shifts that began at different hours. This meant wake-up workers often followed carefully planned schedules. One customer needed waking at 4:30, another needed 5 o'clock, another needed 5:15. Every stop mattered because the entire route depended on timing. In some towns, these workers became local celebrities. Residents saw them almost every day. Children recognized them on the streets. Businesses knew them. Their work connected them with large portions of the community. Yet despite their importance, they rarely appeared in history books. Most people today can name inventors, politicians, and military leaders from the same period. Very few can name the people who made sure thousands of workers reached their jobs on time. That is partly because their profession seemed ordinary at the time. Nobody expected it to disappear. Nobody imagined future generations would find the idea unusual. Another surprising detail is that many customers trusted human wake-up workers more than alarm clocks. At first glance, this sounds impossible. Machines should be more reliable than people, right? Yet many workers felt differently. If an alarm clock failed, nobody knew why. A spring could break, a gear could jam, the clock could stop during the night. But a human being could adapt. If a customer moved houses, the knocker-upper adjusted the route. If someone repeatedly overslept, the knocker-upper spent extra time making sure they got out of bed. Human judgment offered advantages that machines could not provide. There were even stories about customers asking for special treatment. Some paid extra for repeated visits. Others requested louder wake-up calls because they were heavy sleepers. In a way, these workers provided a personalized service that modern alarm clocks still cannot fully match. The profession also attracted people looking for additional income. Some knocker-uppers worked other jobs during the day. Others treated wake-up calls as their primary source of earning. The work required discipline because it demanded an unusual schedule. After all, someone responsible for waking an entire neighborhood had to wake up first. They carried that responsibility every single day. If they overslept, dozens of customers could suffer the consequences. This created a strange situation where one person's punctuality affected many others. The entire system depended on reliability. The more you learn about these workers, the more unusual the story becomes. Cities filled with factories trusted them. Families depended on them. Workers paid them every week. Yet they carried no special equipment beyond simple tools and personal determination. They solved one of industrial society's biggest problems using methods that now seem almost unbelievable. And perhaps the strangest fact of all is that this profession survived for decades despite the existence of alarm clocks. That raises an even bigger question. If these workers were so useful and so trusted, how did an entire profession like this eventually disappear without leaving much of a trace? Before we get to that answer, there is another side of this story that is even stranger than most people realize, and some of the real stories from these neighborhoods sound almost too bizarre to be true. If you enjoy forgotten jobs, hidden history, and surprising stories from everyday life, make sure to subscribe and join us for more fascinating journeys into the past that most people never hear about. The more people depended on wake-up workers, the more these workers became part of something much bigger than anyone expected. What started as a simple service slowly turned into a hidden network that helped entire industrial cities function every day. Most people never thought about it. Factory owners rarely mentioned it. Newspapers did not treat it as a major story. Yet thousands of workers depended on this system every single morning. If you removed these wake-up workers from certain neighborhoods, many businesses would have felt the effects almost immediately. That is because the profession solved a problem that affected far more than one person sleeping through an alarm. Imagine a large factory with hundreds of employees starting work at nearly the same time. If even a small number arrived late, production could slow down. Machines might sit unused. Supervisors would have to reorganize tasks. Deliveries could be delayed. One worker arriving late was manageable. Dozens arriving late created real problems. The same thing happened in coal mining towns. Miners often worked in teams where timing mattered. A delayed worker could affect everyone else. Railway workers faced similar pressures. Trains followed schedules that connected cities and businesses. Even small delays could spread through the system. In many places, wake-up workers became an invisible part of keeping everything moving. The interesting part is that most customers never thought of themselves as buying a luxury service. They saw it as a practical necessity. Paying a small fee each week was simply part of staying employed. In some neighborhoods, the local wake-up worker knew nearly every household on a route. They knew which customers were reliable and which ones regularly overslept. They knew who worked at the factory, who worked at the docks, and who worked on the railways. Over time, they developed detailed routines that allowed them to manage dozens of customers efficiently. Some routes were so carefully planned that a delay at one house could affect every stop that followed. Think about how much trust this required. A customer went to sleep expecting another person to appear at exactly the right time. There were no backup systems, there were no text messages, there were no automated reminders. If the wake-up worker failed, the customer often had no second chance. That trust became the foundation of the profession. Reliability was worth money because reliable workers were difficult to find. This led to something that almost sounds like a small business competition. In some towns, multiple wake-up workers operated in the same area. Customers could choose who they trusted most. A worker known for being punctual attracted more clients. A worker who made mistakes risked losing them. Reputation became one of the most valuable assets in the business. A person who built trust over many years could maintain a steady customer base for a long time. Another surprising detail is how organized some of these operations became. Modern people often picture a lone worker wandering through empty streets with a stick. In reality, many followed planned schedules that resembled delivery routes. They knew exactly where they needed to be and exactly when they needed to arrive. Some served dozens of homes before most people had even started their day. Every stop had a purpose. Every minute mattered. In a strange way, these workers managed a human version of what alarm systems do automatically today. Their route was their technology. Their memory was their schedule. Their reliability was their product. The profession also connected different parts of society that rarely interacted. A wake-up worker might serve miners, bakers, factory workers, printers, and railway employees all on the same route. Each customer lived a different life, yet they shared the same need. They all depended on waking up at the right time. This created an unusual social connection. One person became responsible for helping many different professions function smoothly. Few jobs had such a direct impact on so many people. There were also economic effects that most people never considered. When workers arrived on time, businesses operated more efficiently. When businesses operated more efficiently, production increased. More production meant more goods reaching markets. Something as simple as waking up on schedule contributed to larger systems that powered industrial cities. Nobody claimed that wake-up workers built factories or invented machines, yet they helped support the routines that kept those systems running. That makes their role far more important than it first appears. Another interesting twist is that many customers remained loyal for years. Some families used the same wake-up worker for long periods. Children sometimes grew up seeing the same person outside their window before work. The service became part of daily life. It felt normal. That familiarity created a sense of stability in neighborhoods where jobs could be uncertain and schedules could be demanding. People trusted what worked. As long as the wake-up worker continued showing up, there was little reason to change. Looking back today, it is easy to focus on the unusual tools and strange methods. Those details are certainly memorable, but they can also distract from the bigger story. The real story is that thousands of people built a profession around solving a problem that modern technology now handles silently. Entire communities depended on these workers without realizing how unusual that dependence would seem to future generations. The profession became so common that people stopped noticing it, and that is often when history becomes most interesting. The jobs that seem ordinary in one era can look almost unbelievable in another. Yet even this hidden network had a side that was far stranger than most people knew. Because once you start looking at the real stories left behind by customers, newspapers, and local communities, you discover situations that sound almost impossible to believe. Some of them were funny, some were frustrating, and some revealed just how difficult it could be to wake determined sleepers every single day. By this point, the profession already sounds unusual, but the deeper you look into real stories from these communities, the stranger everything becomes. One of the biggest surprises is that waking people up was often much harder than anyone expected. Many customers worked exhausting jobs that demanded long hours and physical effort. After finishing a difficult shift, some workers slept so deeply that ordinary knocking did almost nothing. This forced wake-up workers to become surprisingly creative. A simple tap on a window was not always enough. Some customers gained a reputation for being almost impossible to wake. Local stories describe people who could sleep through repeated knocking without moving at all. In some neighborhoods, everyone knew who the heavy sleepers were. Wake-up workers often had to spend extra time at those homes because failure could lead to angry customers later in the day. Imagine paying someone to wake you up and then discovering they gave up too early. That situation created constant pressure on the people providing the service. One particularly strange method involved shooting dried peas at bedroom windows. Today that sounds like something children would invent for fun. Yet workers such as Mary Smith used the technique because it solved a practical problem. The peas made a sharp sound against glass without causing damage. More importantly, they could reach windows that were difficult to access. Instead of carrying massive equipment, a worker could use a simple tool and continue moving along the route. The fact that this method actually became part of a profession tells you how unusual the entire system really was. Another strange detail involved customers who demanded proof that they were fully awake. A response from inside the house was sometimes not enough. Certain wake-up workers waited until they saw movement or heard a clear reply. They knew some people would answer through a window and immediately return to sleep. Others might sit up briefly before drifting back into bed. This created a funny situation where the wake-up worker became part alarm clock and part supervisor. Their job was not simply making noise. Their job was making sure the customer stayed awake long enough to begin the day. Some stories suggest that customers occasionally requested special arrangements. A factory worker with a critical shift might ask for multiple wake-up attempts. Another customer might pay extra for a second visit several minutes later. These requests were not always common, but they reveal how important reliability had become. Missing work carried real consequences. People were willing to spend extra money if it reduced the risk of oversleeping. The profession also created unexpected problems with neighbors. Imagine hearing repeated tapping outside nearby windows every morning. Not everyone appreciated the sound. In certain areas, complaints occasionally appeared because wake-up workers disturbed people who were not customers. This was especially true when workers served homes located close together. A service designed to help one person could easily annoy several others. It was a small reminder that every solution creates new problems. Competition sometimes created even stranger situations. In towns with multiple wake-up workers, reputation mattered enormously. Customers preferred workers who were dependable. Losing clients meant losing income. While most workers simply focused on doing a good job, competition occasionally led to arguments over routes and customers. These disputes rarely became major events, but they show that even a profession centered on waking people up had business rivalries. Another fascinating detail is how little equipment was actually required. Modern alarm systems depend on electronics, batteries, software, and manufacturing. The wake-up workers of industrial Britain often relied on little more than a stick, a pea shooter, a route plan, and personal discipline. The entire profession depended on human consistency. Every day, someone had to remember every customer and every scheduled time. One mistake could affect many households. That responsibility becomes even more impressive when you consider the number of people some workers served. There are also stories about customers becoming extremely loyal. Some families stayed with the same wake-up worker for years. They trusted the person more than any mechanical device. This loyalty often survived even when alarm clocks became more available. Trust built over many years is difficult to replace. A machine might promise accuracy, but a familiar person offered something different. They offered accountability. If something went wrong, there was someone to talk to. There was someone who understood the customer's habits and needs. Looking back, one of the strangest aspects of the profession is how normal it seemed at the time. People rarely treated it as remarkable. They simply accepted it as part of everyday life. Newspapers occasionally mentioned wake-up workers, but not because the profession seemed unbelievable. It was because everyone already understood what they did. That normality is what makes the story so interesting today. Entire communities depended on a service that now sounds almost fictional. Children grew up seeing it. Workers budgeted for it. Families relied on it. Yet within a relatively short period, the profession would begin moving toward extinction. Most people inside those communities never saw it coming. They assumed someone would always be there to tap the window, knock on the glass, or fire a pea at exactly the right moment. But a series of inventions was about to change everything. And once those changes began spreading through homes and workplaces, one of the most unusual professions in modern history started losing its reason to exist. The strange thing about the end of this profession is that there was no dramatic collapse. No law suddenly banned wake-up workers. No major scandal destroyed public trust. No single invention appeared overnight and instantly replaced them. Instead, the profession died because several changes happened at nearly the same time. Each change seemed small on its own. Together, they quietly removed the reason the job existed in the first place. For decades, wake-up workers survived because they offered something technology could not reliably provide. They were dependable. They adapted to customers. They made sure people actually got out of bed. Early alarm clocks often struggled to compete with that, but technology rarely stands still. As the 19th century moved into the 20th, clockmakers began solving many of the problems that had once frustrated ordinary workers. Alarm clocks became more accurate. They became easier to use. They became cheaper to manufacture. Most importantly, they became affordable for working families who previously could not justify the cost. One important figure in this story was Seth E. Thomas, whose company helped popularize affordable clocks in the United States. Thomas himself had started as a clockmaker during the early 19th century. Over time, companies like his proved that clocks did not need to remain luxury items. Mass production changed everything. When products can be manufactured in large numbers, prices often fall. As prices fell, more families gained access to reliable timekeeping. What had once been expensive slowly became ordinary. This shift affected far more than wake-up workers. It changed how people organized daily life. Owning a clock became increasingly common. Families no longer needed to depend entirely on public clocks or church towers. They could track time inside their own homes. That may sound like a small change today, but at the time it represented a major step toward independence. People gained greater control over their schedule. Another important change involved improvements in alarm clock design. Early models sometimes failed because of weak mechanisms or poor manufacturing quality. Newer models became more dependable. They could ring loudly enough to wake sleeping workers. They could continue operating for long periods without serious problems. Every improvement reduced one of the advantages that wake-up workers had enjoyed for years. If a machine became reliable enough, customers had less reason to pay another person. Then came electrification. As electricity spread through cities and towns, entirely new types of clocks appeared. Electric clocks reduced some of the problems associated with older mechanical designs. Over time, households gained access to technology that previous generations could barely imagine. The process happened gradually, but the direction was clear. Each decade brought more dependable ways to track time and wake people up. Another factor was changing economics. Hiring a wake-up worker required ongoing payments. Buying an alarm clock required spending money once. For working families watching every expense, that difference mattered. A clock might cost more at first, but eventually it became the cheaper option. Once affordable alarm clocks became widely available, many customers started doing the math. Why continue paying every week for a service when a machine could handle the same task? The answer became harder to justify. What makes this story particularly interesting is that many wake-up workers did not disappear immediately. In some places, they continued operating even after alarm clocks became common. That happened because technology does not spread evenly. Some families adopted new devices quickly, others waited years. Some trusted machines immediately, others preferred familiar routine. Human habits often change more slowly than technology itself. For a period, both systems existed side by side. A worker might own an alarm clock while still paying a wake-up worker as a backup. That combination sounds excessive today, but it reveals how seriously people treated punctuality. Missing work remained a real concern. Many preferred extra security until they fully trusted the new technology. Eventually, however, the balance shifted. Every year brought more clocks into more homes. Every year, fewer customers needed personal wake-up calls. Routes that once served dozens of households became smaller. Income declined. Some wake-up workers retired. Others moved into different jobs. New workers stopped entering the profession because the demand no longer justified it. The change happened so quietly that many people barely noticed. One generation grew up expecting a knock on the window. The next generation expected a clock beside the bed. The transition felt natural because it happened over time. Yet when viewed from a distance, the speed of the transformation is remarkable. A profession that had once helped entire industrial communities function was slowly becoming unnecessary. What makes this even more fascinating is that the people who created affordable clocks probably never thought much about wake-up workers. They were focused on improving products, lowering prices, and expanding markets. Yet their success had unintended consequences. Every reliable alarm clock sold removed a little more demand from the profession. This is one of the most common patterns in history. New technology rarely destroys jobs because someone plans it that way. It usually happens because a better solution becomes available. People change their behavior. Businesses adapt. Old professions lose their purpose. By the middle of the 20th century, the outcome was becoming impossible to ignore. The profession that had once seemed essential was fading away. Many neighborhoods no longer needed it. Many younger workers had never depended on it. The world had found a new way to solve the problem. Yet before the final wake-up workers disappeared completely, they left behind one last reminder of how quickly everyday life can change. Because the strangest part of this story is not that the profession existed. The strangest part is how completely the world forgot it ever happened at all. If someone walked through a modern city today and announced that they worked as a professional wake-up caller, most people would probably laugh. The idea sounds completely unnecessary. Every phone has alarms. Every smartwatch can vibrate. Smart speakers can wake people automatically. Some devices even track sleep patterns and choose the best moment to sound an alarm. We live in a world where waking up has become almost effortless. Yet that is exactly why this story matters. It reminds us how quickly important parts of everyday life can disappear. Not because they were unimportant, but because they became invisible. The profession of the wake-up worker did not vanish because it failed. In many ways, it succeeded. For decades, it solved a real problem. Workers arrived on time, factories kept running, trains stayed on schedule, businesses operated more smoothly. The people who performed this job helped industrial cities function during a period of enormous change. Yet success did not guarantee survival. Once better tools appeared, society simply moved on. One of the most interesting questions is when the last wake-up workers finally disappeared. The answer depends on where you look. In some places, the profession faded early as alarm clocks became common. In other areas, especially certain industrial communities, wake-up workers survived much longer than many people expected. There are reports suggesting that some continued working into the middle decades of the 20th century. That means there were people alive during the age of radio, automobiles, and commercial air travel who still paid someone to tap on a window every morning. That detail alone shows how uneven technological change can be. New inventions do not instantly replace older habits. People adopt change at different speeds. Some embrace new technology immediately. Others trust what has worked for years. Looking back, the profession also reveals something important about human behavior. People often assume technology wins simply because it is newer. In reality, trust plays a huge role. Workers continued hiring wake-up callers because they trusted them. They knew their names. They knew their routines. They knew someone would be accountable if something went wrong. That human connection gave the profession remarkable staying power. For a long time, that trust mattered more than mechanical convenience. Another surprising lesson comes from the way history remembers certain jobs while forgetting others. Most people learn about factory owners, inventors, and political leaders. Those figures certainly influenced the world, but many ordinary workers also shaped daily life in important ways. The wake-up callers were never famous on a national level. They rarely appeared in textbooks. They left behind few monuments and almost no public celebrations. Yet thousands of families depended on them. Their work touched everyday life more directly than many famous historical figures ever did. This is one reason forgotten professions are so fascinating. They reveal how much history exists outside the stories we usually hear. The deeper lesson is not really about alarm clocks. It is about hidden systems. Every society depends on services that people barely notice until they disappear. Today we rely on delivery drivers, internet technicians, data center workers, and countless other people whose jobs operate mostly in the background. Most of us rarely think about them, yet daily life would look very different without their work. The wake-up workers belonged to an earlier version of that same pattern. They were part of the hidden machinery that kept society moving. Once technology replaced them, their importance quickly faded from public memory. Perhaps the strangest part of this entire story is how ordinary it once seemed. Imagine explaining modern smartphones to a worker from the 19th century. They would probably find the device impossible to understand. Yet they might be even more surprised to learn that future generations completely forgot about professional wake-up callers. To them, the profession was normal. It solved a practical problem. It existed because people needed it. There was nothing unusual about that. The weird part only appeared later, after the profession disappeared. That transformation happens more often than we realize. Many everyday habits feel permanent while we are living through them. Then technology changes, society adapts, and future generations struggle to believe those habits ever existed. In the end, this story begins with something very simple. A worker needed to get out of bed on time. That need created a profession. That profession supported communities for decades. Then, a collection of inventions slowly removed the need for it. What remains today is a reminder that history is often hidden inside ordinary problems. We tend to focus on famous inventions and major events, but sometimes the most interesting stories come from everyday challenges that millions of people once faced. The next time your alarm rings in the morning, it is worth remembering that not very long ago, another human being might have been responsible for that moment. Somewhere outside a bedroom window, a person carrying a long pole or a pea shooter was making sure someone reached work on time. Entire neighborhoods depended on that simple service. Then one day, almost nobody needed it anymore, and within a surprisingly short period, one of the most unusual professions in modern history quietly slipped into the past. Before you go, make sure to subscribe and join the channel for more forgotten jobs, hidden stories, and surprising moments from history that changed everyday life in ways most people never notice.